Greetings and welcome to the program. This is Stan Houston, and the program is the Creator Entrepreneur Podcast. It's about ideas. It's about influence, impact, and income. We've got a number of the I's that come around when you are involved in the podcasting business. And you know that I'm encouraging you to do just that yourself, not only be a listener, but a program producer yourself. And we can tell you more about that. And of course, I always list the things that you can gain from being a podcaster. And one of those is you get to meet some of the most interesting people. And that's what I have today. Never knew him. Introduced because we have something in common. And it is a true confession story. You'll enjoy it. Some famous people are mentioned. Some interesting things are brought up. But I know that you will find it not only entertaining, but perhaps you'll actually do what we always do around here. You'll learn more here by accident than most places by design. So the program is ready to go. Get ready. We're on. Hey, again, that's just exactly what I said. Income. Good things come into your life, and storytelling is vital. In fact, it's probably one of the most important and effective means of communication, and I have a world-class storyteller. It's called The Confessions of an Investigative Reporter. Now, I'm just going to tell you the story of Matthew. Just listen to this now. All of you will be saying, oh, I wish I could talk to him, okay? Matthew Schwartz has told approximately 10,000 stories on television stations across the country for 4 decades. He's won more than 200 awards, including 4 New York Emmys and 4 regional Edward R Murrow awards for investigative reporting. Edward R Murrow is one of my heroes. Some of Matthew's memorable stories include an interview with Son of Sam serial killer David Berkowitz. Hey, the trials of mobster John Gotti. Reports on the 9/11 attacks from Ground Zero. The crash 2 months later of American Airlines Flight 587 in Queens, New York. And hundreds of reports on corruption, fraud, and government waste. That'll keep you busy. Matthew has confronted thousands, countless of con artists. After his reporting broke up a large ring of illegal fortune tellers, the father of one of the accused swung a baseball bat at Matthew's head. He missed. That's always a good feeling, to have someone miss. Okay, he did a half dozen interviews with a real estate developer who was not yet well known outside of New York at that time. Guess who that was? You're right, Donald Trump. He went undercover to catch a car dealership rolling back odometers and selling the cars as new. He did a series on pets dying in airplane cargo holds. This even led to a federal law making air travel safe for our pets. And he likes watching the news, but his favorite TV shows of all time are The Honeymooners. I'm with him on that one. I remember it too. Seinfeld, and of course, The Sopranos. Matthew, you're on. Tell us your stories.
Thanks for having me. Well, I retired last June after more than 40 years as a television news reporter at 7 stations around the country, 20 of those years at one station in the New York City market. I was an investigative reporter for the last 25 of those 40 years. I worked in Utica, New York, Richmond, Virginia, TV station in Cleveland, Ohio. Then I went to New York City. My dream was to be on TV in New York, since you may be able to detect by my accent. I grew up in northern New Jersey. And so my goal was to be on the air, have a job in New York by my 30th birthday. And my first day at Channel 9 in New York was my 30th birthday, precisely. I was there 20 years. From there, I went to Tampa, Florida, and then to Tucson, Arizona, where I was from April of 2013 till this past June, when I happily retired. And a goal of mine, a bucket list item, was always to write a book. And people would come up to me, viewers and friends, and say, you have to write a book. What's the story behind that story? What's the real info? What's the juicy details that you couldn't tell on TV? Stories I couldn't tell on TV. So I said, yeah, I can't write a book now. I'm working 10, 12 hours a day. So I started taking notes for a book. And then around 2018, an author in Tucson gave me the best advice. It's like a light went on, and it's not rocket science, but she said to me, write a page a day. So I started doing that every morning, 5 o'clock, maybe earlier, before I went to KVOA Channel 4, where I was an investigative reporter. I wrote a page. Some days a little less, some days a little more, but I averaged a page. And on weekends, I wrote more, 3 to 5 pages on Saturday and Sunday. And so after several months, I had the manuscript. I fully expected to self-publish. I sent it to some friends and some people I don't know who are just wonderful journalists. Bob Dotson from NBC's Today Show. He's kind of their Charles Perrault, traveling the country, telling wonderful, poignant stories. Mike Taibbi from NBC Dateline. Some famous local anchors in New York, like Roland Smith. They love the book. So I was going to self-publish, like I said, and at the last minute, a friend of mine, a former colleague, a great reporter who from New York, also retired, who used a publishing company, said, try this publishing house. It's a small hybrid house called Kohler. They self-publish, but also very few of their books they publish traditionally with an advance, and they take care of it. I sent my manuscript to them, and to my great surprise, they loved it and offered me a traditional book deal. First, rookie author. So that was it's a dream come true. The book was released May 26th of 2020, and it hit #1 on Amazon the next day, the Kindle version in its category. And it's been selling well, especially considering that many bookstore events were postponed due to the pandemic, understandably. But I couldn't be happier. The people's reaction to the book, because it's juicy stuff that you want to know about when you see a story on TV. And I couldn't tell them on the air because of either time constraints, it was politically incorrect, quote unquote, or not, one of the top 5 who, what, where, why, when, how things in this story. So the chapters move, they're self-contained, they're inside the biggest investigations I did. And then I have personal feelings in the last several chapters, characters I met along the way who did crazy things, former colleagues who did crazy things, the highs and lows. And I've been complimented for being very honest. I criticize myself in the book in certain ways. So it's just a dream come true, Stan.
Well, let me just jump in and say, I found this exactly what he just said. Fascinating. And of course, being in radio and being a little bit of a semi-character in terms of people knowing you, having the ability and the good grace to do it well, to tell some of those behind-the-scenes stories without trying to make a crook out of people, but at the same time, telling the real story as it is. And so I want to commend you on that. So commendations and recommendations on that. But I would also, may I just ask this, is some of these characters which we mentioned, John Gotti, Donald Trump, can you tell us a fun, maybe not behind the scenes story, but a fun story of what it was like to deal with some of the characters we might know?
Well, John Gotti famously didn't talk to reporters as he hurried from his limousine to his 4 trials every day. Okay. And they finally got him on a tax charge, like Al Capone. Rudy Giuliani was prosecuting him. But one day after Gotti, one of the many times he was acquitted, people were afraid of him. It was a party, a celebration for him back in his home of Howard Beach, Queens in New York. And he was walking in and smiling, but he still never had stopped really for a reporter. And a colleague of mine, an old school, great meat and potatoes reporter named Robert Miller. So I should preface this by saying Gotti's front was that he ran a plumbing supply company. His non-existent job, as he was the king of the mafia in New York there, was that he ran a plumbing supply company. So
I remember that. Yes, the
he's
plumber.
walking into his house, and it's raucous. There's TV cameras and lights, and 20 of his entourage. They're throwing there a big house party. He just got acquitted. He just got back from the courthouse, and he's walking. And my colleague Robert Miller says, "So, Mr. Gotti, when are you going to return to the plumbing supply business?" And even Gotti couldn't keep a straight face. He stopped in his tracks. He looked at Robert, and he just smiled broadly and chuckled and moved on. Donald Trump, I interviewed 7 times, 6 or 7 times in Trump Tower. This was a few years before he announced he was running for president. I never thought he'd run for president. I thought he might run for mayor of New York. Sometimes I interviewed him. Most of the times I interviewed him was in the lobby of the Trump Tower. I think he liked to be seen there and liked the attention. You know, the crowds of not only people who worked in the office, but or lived in the building, but also the business, the tourists, the passersby. So I interviewed him there a few times, and he would look around. I noticed a lot. While he would look at me when I asked a question, and he'd look around. He's always kind of looking around who's there. A couple times I interviewed him in his private office, one-on-one, and there was a bevy of assistants / secretaries, and they all seemed to me, take this for what it's worth, critical. I don't think it's sexist, but it seemed he hired people based on looks, because they all seemed to be beauty queens. Now, maybe that doesn't say they weren't deserving of the job, but I'm just telling you what I saw. Like 20 gorgeous women sitting in the office. And then I went in and interviewed him a few times. And I remember one time he had a conversation piece on his desk. It was a size 23 basketball shoe worn by Shaquille O'Neal. And so, of course, I asked him about it, and he said Shaq gave it to him, the former great NBA Hall of Fame player, Shaquille O'Neal. But he was a character. I covered Trump's press conference the day he put ads in all 4 of New York's major newspapers. Shortly after that woman, that banker, was raped, assaulted, beaten, the Central Park jogger, as she was come to be known. And they arrested the wrong guys. At the time, we didn't know they were the wrong guys. A man in prison later confessed when the DNA was available and matched up. They sent these 5 kids to prison wrongly and ended up paying them $40 million, the state did. And even the DA said it was a terrible case, a miscarriage of justice. But Trump said that they should be, executed. He came out very strongly, and he criticized Mayor Koch. And that's when I thought he might run for at least mayor. People used to interview him all the time on things that didn't affect his business, but he always would talk on matters of interest to New Yorkers. The assignment editors would send us to interview this real estate guy to talk about everything and anything. So years later, when the 5 guys were released and then paid off, and it was paid by the state rather properly for spending years behind bars wrongly, when another guy in prison, another guy who wasn't with this group of 5, confessed to the crime, and the DNA matched, and there's no doubt he did it. President Trump was asked about that, and he never, ever said he was wrong. And that's the thing in the book I put about. I don't spend a lot of time on politics or on Donald Trump in the book, but I don't think anyone can argue, even his supporters, he never admits he's wrong. He never says he's sorry. And that's a fact. He didn't say it then. Even the prosecutor said it, So I put that in the book, but there's not much about Trump in the book. It's really about my career and interesting stories. And the thing I like about the book, and people have told me, is you don't have to be a journalist to enjoy the book. Regular consumers. I talk about people who say it's all fake news and the media is terrible. Yet I know some of those people who the first time they have a personal problem, they need help. If they get ripped off or scammed, they call a reporter. They call a consumer reporter. I said, that's pretty convenient. So I've helped people. I don't ask what their political persuasion is. I've done stories bashing Republicans and Democrats. I did a story in Tucson bashing Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump because they stiffed the city of Tucson hundreds of thousands of dollars for police overtime at their rallies. And they were supposed to pay, and they didn't pay. They held campaign events there, and they never paid their bills. That was a famous story.
This is just a wonderful time. By the way, if you just joined us, you're listening to this is the Creator Entrepreneur Podcast. My name is Stan Houston. We have ideas, we have influence, income, those good things you need. And our guest today, he will continue, is Matthew Schwartz. And we're going to get right back to him. Matthew, 9/11. Now, can I tell just a little bit of my story, and then I'd love for you to pick it up, okay?
Sure.
My daughter, when her dream was, when she graduated from the University of Minnesota, she said, I'm going to go to New York City because you know what? If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And she wanted to be a writer. So off she went to New York and found a little cheap little flat in Brooklyn. And that's where she started out and went back to Barnes & Noble, got a job there, and then worked her way up. But on 9/11, literally her friend at that time was supposed to be at an appointment at the World Trade Center that very day, and for once in his life, he was late, and he missed it. And probably saved his life. It would have been at the top of the thing. Supposedly, the rumor was that later on, they actually found Muhammad Atta's passport on the roof of her apartment or something like that. Again, who knows? You know, you never know, but that was the story, and it was nearby. But we went up there a couple of weeks afterwards and visited her. But I still remember one of the things that hits me was right after 9/11. They were showing pictures, and people putting pictures all over New York. And today, I still see her. This little Asian woman is holding up this picture of this pretty young woman and just crying her heart out saying, has anybody seen my daughter? Has anybody seen my daughter? Do you have some stories like that from 9/11?
Absolutely. When I went down there, first of all, I was in New Jersey. The studio for the station, Channel 9, where I was working, was located in New Jersey. And by the time I got in there that morning, they had blocked off the Lincoln Tunnel, George Washington, all the Hudson River crossings, the crossings to get into New York City. A few days later, when I got in there, there were people. It was so sad. I mean, it was many days after the attacks, after 9/11, and you knew their loved ones were not going to be found alive. That's right. And they were walking around, like you just said, asking everybody. It was just a matter of time. The saddest story I did on 9/11, and I wrote about this in the book, was a joint venture with my station and People magazine. I interviewed moms who were pregnant on 9/11. Some of them gave birth days after, and their husbands were in one of the towers and perished. I mean, 1 or 2 days later, they gave birth. They were pregnant, and the husband never saw the baby. And that was heartbreaking. And when I did the interview with one of these women, she had a child that was about, so I did this on the 6-month anniversary, but she had a child who was about 4 years old, besides the one that, she had right after 9/11. And she showed me some home videos of her late husband, maybe 32 when he passed. And every time the dad came, the late dad who passed in 9/11 came on the screen in the home video, he would run to the TV and say, Daddy, Daddy. And I said, that's one of the few times I teared up on a story. I think twice I can remember in my career, I actually teared up. That was one. And I didn't want her to see me crying because I needed her to be strong for the interview. It was before we did the interview. I was looking at videos of the late husband to get, see what he looked like. And she was telling me about him. Also, I covered the Special Olympics before I was an investigative reporter. Like I said, I was a general assignment reporter for many years. And I covered the Special Olympics in Princeton, New Jersey, annual event. And to see these young athletes, terrific athletes, with various mental challenges was just so heartwarming. And they were so ecstatic, some of them, not just for winning a race, just for finishing it. That really hit me. And I'm a sports fan, and I just admire athletes, and that really, that was probably tears of joy, unlike the 9/11 event.
I've always wanted to ask a good reporter this when they have been involved in putting something away. What was your greatest feeling where you really said, You know, it couldn't have happened to a nicer bunch of guys.
Well, you know what's funny? I thought you were going in a different direction. It's interesting, Stan. I put in the book, of the 10,000 or so stories I reported, you could probably count, there are probably fewer than 10 that I would look at now and say I wouldn't change anything about it. I always thought I could do something better in a piece. There's so many ways and correct ways to report a story. There's no, for investigative stories, there's no right or wrong way as long as you include all the pertinent information and you keep the viewer interested and you don't go too long unless it's just so riveting. So tell me what you wanted to know again.
Well, in effect, somebody was bad and they deserved it. They got it. I'm saying sarcastically, hey, these were bad guys and we got them. Good.
Well, there was a guy who rolled back odometers at a car dealership that we ended up getting cited for consumer fraud and then shutting down. We got the proof that this guy was rolling back the miles at the dealership and they were selling these cars as new, even though the executives and the general manager drove the cars. We went undercover. We got a tip, and this is the best kind of tip, Stan, from an employee there, an insider, who risked his job by calling me anonymously. Then he did an interview and we digitized his face to keep him anonymous. But he said that the top salespeople and the general manager were driving brand new cars. They were Lincolns to and from work for about a year. And then they'd put back the odometer to 3 miles or whatever and sell it as a brand new car. Maybe they'd put new tires on it, but they weren't far from new. Some of them had, 10, 12,000 miles on it. So we went undercover. We rented a van. I think it said Joe's Cleaners or Laundry Service. We went to the general manager's house, okay, for, I believe, the whole week, Monday through Friday. And we followed him to the dealership, which was 33 miles each way, right? 66 miles round trip. And then after the week, a little after that, we asked to see that car. We saw that it was in the showroom, and they were prepping it for sale, actually. And the miles it showed was 0.7 of a mile. Now, this was a car that had hundreds, if not thousands, of miles on it. We confronted the guy, and the place eventually was cited for consumer fraud. The publicity was so bad, they had to shut down. So that made me feel good. I did a story about a crooked detective, a dirty detective in Pima County, Arizona, who was a burglary detective. And what he did, Stan, was when the belongings of somebody's house that had been stolen were found, say, at pawn shops, instead of calling the homeowner and say, Mr. Smith, we found your jewelry or your artwork or what have you, he would pawn it. He wouldn't tell the homeowner that he found it. He would get it from the pawn shop, being a detective, and he would sell it himself. Okay.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. He got 3.5 years in prison. He was a detective for 15 years. And we call the story Dirty Detective. And I also, for that story, a source gave me something I never obtained in my 40 years of reporting. He gave me the audio tapes of this detective being interviewed by the internal affairs investigators. When he was under investigation, they have the police body, of course, internal affairs, when a cop is under questioning or investigation for doing something illegal. And I actually had the audio interview of this cop being interviewed, and he denies that he stole anything. So for somebody to give that to me, that's the only time that's happened in my career. Well, but there's a lot of, and I put a mover out of business in Tucson, Arizona.
Yes. That
was ripping people off and found guilty of consumer fraud. I exposed a lot of scam artists, which makes me feel good. The best, I said this, they gave me a nice tribute last June of 2020 when I retired. And I said on the air on that, my last day at work, I said, the best feeling I ever had was when somebody would tell me, thanks for what you do for the community. As corny as that may sound, that's why I became an investigative reporter, to try to make a difference.
Well, that is where you truly do make a difference, when you actually help the community rather than, as some people in the news business today are trying to build their own reputation, trying to help the community. And by the way, you'll find that in his book, and it'll impress you. In effect, he's kind of what we would say, he's kind of old school, one of the good guys. So, Matthew, one last question, okay? You've met a lot of bad people, and you've met a lot of good people. And particularly, I say Edward R Murrow Award. You have to be our age to remember what an incredible reporter he was. But can you give me one or two of the people in your 40-year career where you would say, and I may not even know them, but they were truly the real deal? They were good guys, good gals. They're what it's all about.
I'm happy to say I did meet some of them. They weren't all scoundrels that I met. I did a story on a young man, 21 years old. His dream was to be a U.S. Marine. He was stopped from going in at the last minute because the armed forces have a rule about how much debt you have before you join. And he had debt that was built up, unbeknownst to him, by his parents, who had both claimed Social Security, and they had that on his record. They attached that to him. They both claimed him on their SSI, unbeknownst to each other, and he couldn't afford to get down his debt. The maximum, I believe, was $12,000 or $12,500. Anyway, I did this story after he got the letter saying you can't join the Marines, and the guy was a college student, part-time, and he had a little construction job. He couldn't pay off the debt in the 3 months, I believe it was, when he was supposed to start basic training. So I did that story, and a lady saw the story, and she called me right after it aired and said, I want to pay off his debt. It was, I believe his debt was $17,500. And she gave him a check for the money. And I did this meeting with them, and she didn't want the publicity. We hid her face. She was an 80-year-old widow who said, I just believe in paying it forward. I report the story. The next day, I get a call from the office of a congresswoman in Tucson, Martha McSally, and she used to be in the Air Force, and she used her influence to get the debt waived. So now the guy can go in the Marines. So I'm ecstatic. I called the lady back who gave the guy the $17,500. I said, he doesn't need that money now. He can go in the Marines. He goes, no, I'm going to let him keep it. I believe in paying it forward. I'm not going to take it back. Let him start a savings account. So that was a great feeling that we, really made a difference. And that lady, that 80-year-old lady, that's a great person that I will always have fond memories and feelings for.
What a wonderful story. What a wonderful story. That's the kind of stories we need in COVID crisis. Good people. Hey, this has been a wonderful performance. I really enjoyed this. As I oftentimes like to say, you'll learn more here by accident than most places by design, and you've fulfilled that mission. Hey, but now you get to pitch you. So before you finish up, tell us, how can we get your book, and how can we find out more about you? Because you certainly have stories to tell and legends to share.
Just go to MatthewSchwartzBook.com. That's MatthewSchwartzBook.com. The book's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, websites, and just about everywhere books are sold online. And if you want to email me, talk about how to get a signed copy and all, you can email me through that website, MatthewSchwartzBook.com. And I appreciate the time, Stan, and the great questions.
Well, I appreciate your time. As I said, as I oftentimes have tried to teach other people, is try to be good yourself, but try and get great guests, and they'll make you look good. And you've done that for me, and I'm grateful. Thank you, Matthew. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Bye.
Wasn't that fun? See what I said? You meet some of the world's most interesting people from all around the world. That actually happens. It's now worldwide radio on demand. And Matthew has lots of stories, and I'm trying to convince him that he should just be the storyteller to the world, where he can take all of the wonderful things he's learned and some of the tough stuff that he has gone through and be a source of wisdom, insight, truth, and inspiration for other people. And by the way, I'd like you to do the same. So why don't you do as he did? Raise your hand, say, Stan, I got some stories to tell and perhaps some wisdom to share, and I'd like to do just that. We'd like to help you do that. So reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. And once again, thank you very much to Matthew. We got to have him back. We got to do that, that's for sure. And I'm sure he will. And we hope you'll come back too. You are in tune with the Creator Entrepreneur Podcast because you are one of the 3% of the population who has purpose. And you have ideas, you have influence, you have impact, you have income, and most importantly, you have something to share and serve others with. So take care. We'll be back. You be back too. Bye for now.